I'm still not where I want to be ultimately, but I'm a lot further along than I was a year ago. I've made a lot of progress. So I just wanted to get on here and talk about the choices I've made, the decisions that got me here, basically, and just a bit about my story, who I am. This isn't going to be scripted at all, so forgive me if it's a little bit awkward. But we could basically start when I went to college. I took the traditional path, like I thought that I was supposed to, like most people did. I thought that was the next logical step in life, was to go to college, to get an education, to get a degree. But I found out pretty quickly that I was not very well suited for college. I was a terrible student. I was very lazy. I spent most of my time drinking, smoking weed, just wasting my time, basically. I was a pretty good student early on in high school, but as the years went by, I became very withdrawn, I would say. I stopped caring about grades. I stopped caring about school in general, and I pretty much just started doing whatever I wanted to do, uh, and which usually involves skipping school. And I carried those habits into college with me. So after going around like this for several years, honestly, probably 3 years I wasted, just dropping classes, getting bad grades, not getting really any meaningful progress towards a degree. I uh, I was at home for the summer. I was gonna just you know, go to school the next year and keep trying. Um, but I had picked up pool maintenance as a summer job, and I enjoyed it. It was very peaceful for me to just go around, cleaning people's pools. I'm not much of a blue collar type of guy. I'm not the best at working with my hands, which I'm not saying pool maintenance is necessarily blue collar. It's pretty easy, but that's just what I was doing. And I'd always wanted to live somewhere warm. I'm from Atlanta, so it's very cold, and as you can see, it's pretty dead here in the winter. I always wanted to live somewhere warm, so I had seen an ad on Indeed for a pool maintenance worker in Fort Lauderdale, which I love Fort Lauderdale. It's a great city. I'd vacationed there a few times, and the pay was, I think, $850 a week, which at the time for me that was like big money. Um, and I called the guy. We had a great conversation, and I told him I lived up in Atlanta and wanted to move down, and he said sure. So I ended up, basically being done with school at that point. Didn't get a degree, and I moved down to Fort Lauderdale on my own. I started initially I was staying just in Airbnbs until I found an apartment. I ended up finding a roommate on Facebook Marketplace. Um, and getting an apartment and everything. But early on, I was just staying in Airbnbs. I was waking up at 7 o'clock every morning for this pool maintenance job. Um, you know, Driving around, learning from this guy, doing pool maintenance, and eventually, I realized I was not cut out for working with my hands. I remember it was one day, it was a downpour all day, and I had been soaked for hours, and I was just so miserable in the truck with this guy. And he asked me to get out and start working at this one house when it was just like a torrential downpour. And I basically just asked if I could wait a few minutes for it to stop raining, and that really set him off. And he basically just said, "Don't come back." And I didn't. And I actually ended up doing another pool maintenance job. That one didn't work out either. It was like kind of a new company being started, and they ended up cutting my route. But anyway, so I realized that working with my hands was not for me. And I don't think there's that much money in the business. The dude that I originally worked with was working from sun up till sundown to barely make. I probably not even make six figures. Which, respect to that guy for the grind. Like I don't look down on anyone, because I've done all of it. And respect to that guy for his grind. And if that's the business that he wants to do, then I respect that. But I realized that just was not for me. So for the next few months, I was loving Fort Lauderdale. It's beautiful. But I was bouncing around from job to job, not really making any progress. I was broke. I had a 2011 Infiniti that I was driving. I was living in a small 2 bedroom, 1 bath house with a roommate I found on Facebook Marketplace, who's actually a buddy of mine now. Um, but I was kind of carrying those same habits still. I was smoking a lot of weed. I was drinking. I was partying. I was kind of numbing myself. I wasn't waking up every morning with energy. I wasn't waking up with effort. I was just waking up and surviving the day, if that makes sense, and using drugs and alcohol to cope with the fact that I felt inadequate, um, that I wasn't where I wanted to be in life. So this went on for quite a while. I ended up I ended up finding a girlfriend, and I had a pretty stable life eventually. I was making under $1,000 a week, right around probably $900. I was working in a call center. I worked in several call centers. Um, but I started getting into some sales adjacent roles, some, phone sales, call centers, those sort of things. And I started, like I said, I was making a stable income of about $1,000 a week, give or take. And I could have honest. I met people in the office that were in their late 40s that had been doing it for their whole life pretty much. And I realized that that could be me. And once again, I don't look down on anyone, but I realized that's not what I wanted out of life. And as much as I loved Fort Lauderdale, I absolutely love it down there. But I wasn't making any meaningful progress towards the person that I wanted to be. So what I ended up doing, um, I had a buddy from college, who was on a similar life path as me. He was, using drugs and alcohol, partying, all that stuff. But since we had parted ways in college, he had actually moved to California and started working in the solar industry, door knocking. I'm sure we all kind of know that industry at this point, the annoying guys at your door trying to sell you solar panels. So he was one of those guys. And he had long been trying to get me to come out and uh, to join him. Um, but I just couldn't see myself knocking doors. I was scared, honestly. Um, but eventually he showed me 300K in his checking account. And I was about 23 at the time. And that was insane. I still really haven't seen anybody with that level of success in their, early mid 20s. So I was in. I said, I'll pack my stuff up. I'll move. At this point, he had moved back to Georgia, which is another reason that I was in. He had moved to Savannah, Georgia, which is about 4 hours from Atlanta. So at that point, I was in. He said that I could come move into his house in Savannah. He had a room ready to go for me, and we were ready to go. So I broke up with my girlfriend. I packed up my stuff. I grabbed my dog, and within a month I moved up to Savannah. I still remember the first day that he took me out to go door knocking. I was actually terrified. I could feel the most biggest lump in my stomach that you could ever feel. But I got out of the car. At this point I had sacrificed everything to be able to do this. So I got out there and I did it. He knocked with me for a while, and you know eventually I started doing it on my own. One of the first days I went out there, I set an appointment that ended up closing, and that appointment ended up making me about 3 grand. And once I saw that, I was pretty much hooked. I was like, I couldn't believe that I didn't have to trade my time for money anymore. But now I was on a different grind. I was knocking doors. I've always been an anxious person. I'm an introvert. I'm not the best social person. So doing this job for me felt like I couldn't breathe half the time. But I did it, and we went on blitzes, or the little trips, staying in Airbnbs. It was rough, but I did it, and I was making good money. I had my first 10K month, and I was over the moon. I remember driving home after my first 10K month to go back and see my family, and I couldn't believe how happy I was. I was absolutely over the moon. And I felt proud of myself, I think, for the first time in my life, because I'd always felt like I was a failure, or I was less than, or I was a loser for this or that reason. And that was my first taste of success, was having that 10K month, and then a few more after that. But what I quickly found out, when I got there, is that my friend who had put me on and really done a lot for me, really got me into the industry, made me more money than I'd ever seen in my life. And I love the guy, but he was becoming increasingly unstable. And I found out that he was addicted to uh, like pharmaceutical pain pills. I'm not going to get super specific about anything, but it's important to the story. So his behavior became extremely erratic. He was super high performer in sales, but just pretty much the biggest asshole you could think of. And I remember there was one time he asked me, I had taken my first break to go to a music festival with some of my friends. And he asked me if, when I was driving back, if I could pick up, some pills, like, go to the plug and get some pills, because it was several hours away, and it would be on the way for me. But it'd be several hours away for him. And what I said was, absolutely not. I didn't want to jeopardize my future, even if it was a low chance. I said, absolutely not. And that really set him off. He was furious. He ended up going to the manager of our sales team, and basically demanding that he fire me, which started this whole fight amongst everyone. And long story short, I ended up getting out of that situation. I basically moved home back with my parents. I'd lost my place in Florida. I was rapidly going broke because I had no more income to speak of. So I pretty much lost everything. All the money I made, I wasted. I blew it over the course of probably 6 months. But I'd only been successful for a handful of months. So I only had, you know, 30K saved up around there, which was the first time in my life I had any kind of real money. I was 23 years old. And I was starting back from ground zero. So now I knew that solar was a thing that you could make money at. But I had no direction. I tried to do solar around my parents' house, like working for a few solar companies. I completely failed. I tried to self-gen and be the closer and the appointment setter and teach myself how to close, which I did have a few good closing opportunities, and I actually closed several deals. But between HOA regulations in Atlanta, which are a lot stricter, a number of factors, it just didn't work out. I barely made any money. A lot of the sales I did make canceled. It's a very inconsistent industry. Part of it, I'm sure, was my lack of effort, my lack of diligence, my lack of skill. I'm not going to sit here and say it was somebody else's fault, but I just couldn't cut it as a solo solar salesman, living at my parents' house. And I was really at a loss. I was really feeling like I had one opportunity to make something of myself, and I blew it. And I was feeling really down. And about that time, my parents, I was at home. My parents called me into the living room, and they looked very upset. They told me they had some bad news for me. And what they ended up telling me is that my cousin, I have a cousin who was my age growing up. He was 1 year younger than me, but in school, but only a couple months younger than me in reality. So we grew up together. We spent most of our teen years. We went to college together. We pretty much did everything together. And my cousin was another person like myself, but actually a lot worse, who was a person who was addicted to drugs, drinking, partying, everything that I already discussed. But he was more towards the extreme end than I was. So what they ended up telling me is that he was found dead in his apartment, earlier that week or that day. And at that moment, I just felt numb. I didn't feel anything. I just I just walked out and I went to the gym like I was planning on doing, and it didn't really sink in for a few more days that reality hit that I would never see him again. And that experience really changed me. It got me thinking a lot about what I wanted out of life, about how life is finite, how we have one chance at this. So that made a huge impact on me, and it's something I still struggle with. That was 2.5 years ago. It's something that I still haven't gotten over, and I never will, but it's just a part of life now. Hopefully I'll see him again one day. Um, but for now, I can just keep him in my memory. But that got me really thinking about life and what I wanted out of life. And where I eventually landed was that I wanted to get the hell out of Atlanta for a while, and I wanted to see some of the world. Um, so what I did was I entered a period of trying to accumulate money, but not anchor myself to where I couldn't take an extended trip. I didn't want to get the best job ever and then never leave Atlanta again, if that makes any sense. So I actually tried another sales job. It was another door knocking role, if you can believe it, for windows and doors and roofing, siding, home exteriors. And that was a terrible experience. It was the company felt like a cult. They were very demanding. They were very like intense. It was everything was very scripted. The interview was scripted. Like the guy who was interviewing me had a script that he was following. Like they would pretend to like care about you or your life, but it really be scripted. They'd be like asking about your family, and that was like part of the script to like see if they could like, I don't know, like connect with you emotionally. Whatever. So I did that for a while. I was the worst salesman I was the worst appointment setter, one of the bottom 5 out of like 40 appointment setters probably. I hated the script. I hated doing it every day. I made nothing above the base salary, which was $1,000 a week, which ended up being $1,750 every 2 weeks. So I was back where I started income wise. That was one of the worst experiences I've had working. But I was gonna work towards the closer role. I always wanted to be a closer. I didn't want to be out there knocking doors. I wanted to be a closer. But by the time I got to be a closer, I just was so fed up with the company that I couldn't do it anymore. And around this time, I saved that money. I ended up, serving, bartending just to try to earn some extra cash, really. And I had also realized around this time that a lot of the commissions I had made during my time as an appointment setter, I didn't get paid out on originally from when I first started with my friend who got me essentially that whole thing blew up. So what I found out is that he had gone into our payment software basically and talked to the people on the back end and gotten my commissions paid out to him. So he had about $10,000 that was paid out to him that was from jobs I set the appointment for, but he took the whole commission. He basically marked them as a self-gen, which shouldn't be possible, but he did it. And whenever I figured it out, I was livid. I've never felt that intense regret, because money is really stored life energy. It's not just paper. It's your effort. It's your blood, sweat, and tears. And to know that I had gotten ripped off for, 10 grand, I've never felt such emotional turmoil in my life. So I tried to talk to him about it. He blocked me. he was, one of my best friends, just blocked me when I asked him for my money. So I had no choice but to file a lawsuit. We ended up settling out of court. He paid me, and after he went to rehab and got clean and fixed his life, I forgave him, and we're on speaking terms. But I would never go into business with him or a guy like him. But that detour out of the way, like I said, I bounced around from these sales jobs. I did the windows job. I bartended. I served, which felt super. Again, not looking down on anybody, but I felt super like embarrassed because I was back in my hometown, like serving and bartending after I thought I had moved past that. I sold furniture at the local furniture store. I did a bunch of things and none of them worked out. But what I ended up doing was saving up a few $1,000s. And I decided that, especially with my cousin's death and all the things that had been weighing on me, I was going to take a long trip and just see some of the world and just not be so tense for at least a month. So what I ended up doing was backpacking the Philippines for a month. And then I went to Japan after that with my friends. I solo backpacked the Philippines, and then I met up with some friends in Japan. And the solo backpacking experience, I can't recommend it enough. I stayed in private rooms at hostels, so I had the social aspect of meeting people at the hostel, but I still had my own room because I'm weird like that. I don't want anybody messing with my stuff. And that was just the best thing. I met people from all over the world. I did amazing, excursions, just fun experiences. I went swimming with whale sharks. I did waterfall jumping and, all the stuff you see on Instagram, those beaches that look immaculate, just the most turquoise water. I got on ferries, took flights around the Philippines, just traveled and just really met a lot of great people, met a lot of great travelers, guys and girls from all over Europe, America, mostly from Europe. There weren't a lot of Americans there, which is great because, all I know are Americans. So it was good to branch out a little bit. I met a lot of cool locals. The Filipino people are wonderful. And I realized that there's a lot out there to life. And I realized that, the hustle and grind culture isn't all that it's cracked up to be. I went, and then I had an amazing Japan trip with my friends. I love Japan. I love the Japanese people as well. I got to connect with and socialize with some great locals there as well. And I realized, of course I have a love for travel. I think everyone does, but I had never traveled internationally. But on the plane to Japan, I realized I was running out of money. I realized that some of my payments that I thought I was getting for some of my old commissions and things like that weren't really clearing like I thought. And I owed my dad money. I was supposed to be getting a job when I came back, and I ended up having kind of a bit of not a panic attack, but I was feeling very stressed about my place in life. My friends were both much more successful than I was. And this was about a year ago. So I was feeling very insecure. I was feeling very panicked. After the month in the Philippines, I felt very stress-free, but going to Japan, the walls started to close in on the way over. I ended up having a good time, but I had just kind of a solo plane ride with a lot of time to think, and I started to feel very stressed about where I wanted to be. And once I got back from that trip, like I said, I had an amazing time, and I'm so happy I was able to have that experience. But once I got back, I decided that I needed to make a change, and I kept looking around and applying for in-home sales jobs because that's what I knew could earn a great income. I ended up getting a job with an interior remodeling company, and I was very excited. But on the second day, the manager who hired me got fired. He is the only person I had made contact with at the company. I was just him, me, and like two other people in an empty warehouse learning about, I'm not going to get too specific, but just learning about these interior design pieces, floors, cabinets, or kitchens, all that stuff. And I thought, what am I going to do now? Am I gone? I'd never met anyone else at this company. I didn't know anything about it. The next day, a new manager came in. He was a young guy like myself, very energetic, very charismatic guy. And I wondered if he was full of BS at first. But as I got to know him and as I trained with him, he did not have very much time for me. I pretty much had to teach myself everything, but what he did teach me was a good closing strategy. Um, as I got to know him, I started to really build those skills. And once I got out there and started going, now I was a closer. I didn't have to do an appointment setting stage. We do online marketing. So now I'm a closer and I'm going out there every day, driving all over Atlanta, going to several sales appointments per day. And I started getting good at closing and I started enjoying closing. And I started realizing that those opportunities are huge for me. And it's not that I have to go to work, that I get to go to work and I get to have these opportunities and get these reps in. And I started taking advantage of the compensation plan, and every single dollar I could, I started selling higher margins. I started connecting with people more. I started talking to people and really evaluating like who I'm sitting across the table from, not just another face that I can earn a commission from, but really trying to connect with people. And I started to love to connect with people, which, like I said, I was an introvert, so it was never something that came naturally to me. So I continued to develop those skills, and I ended up becoming a top salesman at this company. Top three out of hundreds of reps, and I ended up finishing this year out. Just closed out 2025, making well over six figures. Um, I got a beautiful new apartment. I got a BMW X3 to drive for work during the day. It's a SUV, so I can fit all my gear and my samples in there. And I ended up buying this F-Type a week ago. And buying this F-Type was a huge pivotal moment for me. At the end of the day, it's just a thing, but it's a bucket list thing for me. It's something that I always wanted, was to have a sports car, and this, in my opinion, is one of the most beautiful cars ever made. I absolutely love it. I've been just driving around like a 12-year-old and being obnoxious and just having a great time. And it really got me thinking, like, if you told my year ago self, or 2 years ago or 3 years ago, where I'd be now, I wouldn't have believed you. Even when I was finding early success in solar, it felt very unstable. It felt very difficult to manage. I feel securely successful now. And what I'd like to do with this channel and this journey is just help guys like myself. I'm not a 17-year-old course seller with a Bugatti or a Lamborghini. I'm a 27-year-old guy, with a modest amount of money, but I did manage to make well over six figures, and buy, my dream car, and live how I wanted to live to an extent. And I'm very happy with that. But to close out this talk, I'll say that I have huge plans in store, because being a traveling salesman in Atlanta is not the last stop for me. Ultimately, I would like to help people like my former self and my current self get to the next level, clear out those blocks, help form a new identity free of those vices, the weed, the alcohol, the numbing. And I think a lot of that was me being uncomfortable with who I really was. So I wanted to numb myself. I wanted to change myself and kill that anxiety that I always felt. But this is just the first step. My life goals are international. They're goals that are gonna. I want to create something for myself. I want to create a business. I want to create an empire for myself. I want to be able to live on my own terms, where I'm trading even less of my time for money. And I want to help people on the same journey. I'm not sitting here saying that I'm some guru, I'm perfect, but I think that's a strength. I think my strength comes from the fact that I did make pretty much every mistake along the way. I think my strength comes from the fact that I've been where a lot of people are, and I'm not selling people a fantasy. I'm inviting people to join me on my journey as I align myself with my dream life and I become an even better version of myself. I step into an even stronger identity. And this was just basically a prologue, my story up until this point. There's a lot of other things that I could touch on. Fitness, relationships, women, more times that I was broke, just my endeavors with content, with creativity. You know, there's a lot of things that I'd like to discuss and that I'm going to discuss on here. But I wanted to just introduce myself and talk about where I've been, where I'm at now, and where I'd like to be. And where I'd like to be is living a life on my own terms, living in the place where I want to live, waking up, doing the things I want to do every day, and helping other people like me succeed. So if that's something that's interesting to you, I would encourage you to please subscribe and just follow me along with this journey. I'm going to be posting at least 3 times a week. That's my commitment. And I'd love to see you follow along the way. So thank you.